SSTUWA members are strongly encouraged to register for the range of industrial and professional courses available face-to-face or online. Find these courses online via sstuwa.org.au/training.
Hello and welcome to Western Teacher Live. My name is Bob Figg and this is a very special edition covering an incredibly significant win for the State School Teachers Union of Western Australia after over a decade of campaigning that has spanned thousands and thousands of members over the year, from the very newest of teacher members to people in the senior officer level, one of whom is with me today, the SSTUWA President Matt Jarman, who many moons ago, before he was involved in the office, was actually flying over to Canberra quite regularly to try and persuade people to deliver full funding for schools. And Matt, a very special announcement made recently by the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese.
That's right, Bob, although if you blinked last Friday afternoon at the National Press Club, it would have been easy to miss it. And the reason for that is simply because the AEU, the Federal Education Minister and the Prime Minister are still resolving many of the trajectory details across each of the states. But nonetheless, we should not take away from, as you just mentioned, the efforts over more than a decade from members across the entire SSTUWA and AEU, that we have finally reached a position where we will get to 100%. That is 25% from the federal government and 75% from the state government, and a removal of the 4% capital depreciation tax, whatever that actually was, once and for all. When that 4% disappears is exactly what is being negotiated between states and federals, as I sit here on the 31st of January.
Yes, and it will be interesting to see how all of that pans out over time. For those of you who don't know, this all goes back to a man called Gonski. And many of you may recall the Gonski inquiry into public education. It delivered a very simple and understandable formula to fund public schools to the full level that they required to deliver a fine education to all public school students here in Australia, and it looked like it was going to be the panacea for all ills, and then the politicians got involved and it all came crashing down, and we ended up with a deal under the Morrison government which saw the states providing 75% of funding for public education, and it saw the Commonwealth government complementing that with 20%. And even my maths is good enough to work out that left you only at 95% of what was actually required. And then the kicker was that they took a further 4%, which had previously been delivered as additional funding for very specific outcomes, and they rolled that into their 75. So in effect, what you ended up with was 91% of what was required for each school. And Matt, at least now, while the details are there to be worked out, we can genuinely say there will be 100% school funding, public school funding.
There will be genuinely 100% full funding. No more will we see full funding and 100% missing from those promotional pieces from either tier of government. It will now be 100% full funding. The 4% introduced by the Morrison government in 2018 negotiations, as you mentioned, was the accounting trickery that allowed the state governments around the country, not just ours, to take away 4% from its 75. We here in WA signed a deal between Minister Booty and Minister Clare at the beginning of the 2024 school year, which saw us get a significant injection of $1.6 billion, and that should not be underestimated because that was the start of our success. We were significant in achieving that. But we also held an uncomfortable but tight line that only took us to 96%. So whilst it was wanted that we would play ball and simply turn around and say, no, it's 100, we could not ever deny what we knew. And we knew through proper budget paper analysis that had been carried out over some time that it was still just 96%. And going back to the original Gonski that you referred to, Bob, when the full funding and equitable funding model was put together, known as Gonski, WA was identified as requiring 105% of the school resourcing standard. And a reminder to members is that justification was based upon the fact that we have small towns and a big geography. Lots of schools spread far, far apart, raised our costs as well as other demographic student factors. So we have not achieved the 105%, we have achieved the 100%. And Gonski perhaps may even review its initial position for WA now some 11 years later. But at the end of the day, we are in a far more equitable position across the country, and it is absolutely due to the efforts of the AU and each of its branches like the SSTU, and therefore due to all of the members. And we are going to celebrate that in the next edition of the Western Teacher.
We are indeed, and of course it's spanned campaigns. I give a Gonski, it's spanned the For Every Child campaign. There have been very many efforts at this, and I think most significantly of all, people have never given up this fight when there were times that it would have been much easier to walk away from it. And I'm just going to read you directly here. It's a bit of an advance notice. You can also read this in Western Teacher. The Premier of WA, Roger Cook, has confirmed that as part of the new agreement announced by the Prime Minister that the state Labor government will remove the Morrison government provision that allowed the state to claim 4% of public school funding for indirect school costs, such as capital depreciation, and replace it with 4% of recurrent funding on eligible expenses, while also maintaining its 75% share of the SRS for public schools. Now, we can pass the language there, but there does seem to be a significant commitment to the full 75 and another 4, and that will become clearer as negotiations continue about detail and timing.
Well, the most exciting word in that paragraph that you've read through, Bob, for me is also. So it's 4% also maintaining 75% of the SRS. But as I mentioned, we are still waiting on details, and I suspect that'll all be clarified over the next week or so as school goes back. But I really would like every member who's been involved in every one of those 4 or 5 campaigns. We've certainly invested hundreds and hundreds of hours, and as have members, advocating on our behalf with local communities, making sure the message has got out. And because of all of that pressure that's been built up over time and everyone's contribution, we've managed to get there. And that's exactly what we highlight today in today's podcast.
And as we say, it's a very significant win, whether you filled in a postcard or you knocked on an MP's door or you sent a message via email to the PM, or back in the day, this campaign started so long ago that some of them went by carrier pigeon. And of course, that national work of Karina Haythorpe and the team you've already acknowledged. Now begins the really difficult bit, which is how do you look forward and initiate the reforms that we're going to need. Now we've got some solid funding that will stop the teacher drain.
Well, we've got a lot of ideas around that. We've got a lot of ideas across the AU, but here in Western Australia, there's no doubt that we need to see greater investment in teaching and learning. That is what teachers receive in professional learning, and also provision of adequate teaching resources. The regionalisation of resourcing, we need to work with the department. We've broken down the allocation and location of our system support to people in classrooms, whether they be students and teachers. There's an enormous amount still to address with workload. Whilst it's good that the Workload Intensification Task Force has already met, there's nothing that's come of it yet, and we need to see that produce. But also we need to see greater investment in making sure that workload is reduced, and that would include hiring more teachers and other staff to support teachers in our schools. And I think a significant part of the funding has to go to attracting, retaining and hopefully growing the teaching workforce, because as the agency capability report clearly identifies we've lost more than 5,000 teachers in the last few years. And we need to now focus upon the people who are the coalface of our industry, and that's our teachers and school leaders and school psychs, and attract, retain, and in my view, grow that part of the workforce.
And in that agency review, and for those of you who don't know, that's a government-commissioned review. It was conducted by a former, very senior public servant within who was operating in the Premier's office, indeed, at one point. And it was... Well, I won't use my own words about the report, but we can use the West Australians' word, Matt. The review was...
Bethany Hyatt was very careful and selective in the language in the article that she wrote on the 20th of December when most West Australians were busily focused upon Christmas shopping and those kinds of things, and she described it as scathing. And quite frankly, having read and knowing Facing the Facts very, very well, and then the Minister's own workload intensification task force, both of which came up with sound and well-supported recommendations. The agency capability review really just states what's in those reviews. What we already knew has been restated, but this time by another arm of government. So our view is very clear. We've articulated it on behalf of our members already to government, and that is no more review, no more consultations. We know what we have to do. We've now got this full funding model coming back into play. It's now time to engage with all of the key stakeholders, of which obviously the State School Teacher Union is a significant one, and get a plan back for public education that's going to look after the students and the staff in our schools.
And I think one of the things that review identified very strongly is actually do something, not just have an endless review process, and develop that long-term strategy. And that's something that the Facing the Facts recommended, and the SSTUWA is going to be part of.
It is. We've been talking to government since the start of the 2025 working year around the sort of areas that we could focus on. We've met with the Director General, the new Director General, of course, and I'm pretty happy with where we're at so far. But unfortunately, WA, or fortunately, acknowledging the democratic process of our community, we've got an election that we have to get through, and then the real work really begins. But what there won't be any tolerance for, Bob, and I'm sure this is what our members want to hear, is there won't be any more, tolerance of consultation and review, particularly those external review businesses that have been populated across the education landscape. It's now simply time to sit down around the table with the coalface and work out exactly what we're going to do and what we're going to spend this new money on. And for us, the formula is pretty clear. It's very, very well stated in Facing the Facts, for example, and the agency capability recommendations are equally strong. I think it's available on our website. I urge all of our members to have a glance of it. It's very clear. I think it will resonate and connect with many of them, no matter what part of the system they work in.
Certainly is. www.sstuwa.org.au is the website address, and you can just search the review on there. And if you want to save some time and you've already had Facing the Facts, pretty much it repeats it. So I just want to come back to Facing the Facts too, Matt, because this in many ways, the Facing the Facts process was something the union committed to. It wasn't universally seen as a fantastic idea. There were people perhaps in government as well as anywhere else who thought it would be a pointless exercise. The idea of Facing the Facts was to start a conversation about education. It's sort of done that, hasn't it?
Facing the Facts has been spectacularly successful in advocating on behalf of our members and also in highlighting the issues to the broader community. I've been involved with lots of members of the WA community that I don't think we would ever have had a relationship with in the past, who simply resonate and connect with what it states in Facing the Facts. So it really encourages you to understand that there are so many West Australians who genuinely, no matter where they sit, politically in the world or in what band of the community, who really do want Western Australia to have a strong public education system, and that's why Facing the Facts has connected with them. It's also, in my opinion, Facing the Facts prompted the government a knee-jerk reaction perhaps to do the workload intensification task force, and then I think also prompted the agency capability review of the Department of Education to possibly be brought forward so that government can get on with it. And I think that the government wants to get on with it. I get a feeling post the election that we have a WA government undoubtedly will be re-elected who do want to make sure that this embarrassment of the past is fixed up and gone.
Yeah, I always, as a former football commentator, disassociate myself with anyone calling a result before we've gone and played added time. But yes, it certainly does look like you're going to have a government to work with. Also, just additionally for you, Western Teacher is now available both online and you'll be receiving your print copy. We have no control over the postage times, unfortunately, but keep an eye out for it or go and check out the online version, because in this edition you will also be able to read we invited the four main political parties in Western Australia were invited to submit their education pledges, if you like, and to answer a questionnaire that we'd sent them based around our state election document. You can see who responded and you can see how they responded in the current issue of Western Teacher. Matt, I just want to go back, and I know you've listed a few of these things, but there's been an awful lot that's happened it seems like only two things have happened in the last week, but it's been a lot more than that. Good news from the state government pledge on government regional officer housing, another area the union has campaigned on for a very, very long time.
That's right. During January, quite a number actually of the political parties have made promises to the community about what they will do about the stock levels of GROW, and that's very much welcome and received, although our response to that was a little bit muted in saying that, look, stock is certainly one part of it. We don't know where the 100 as promised new buildings will go. That is definitely a question that still needs to be answered. No doubt it will be straight after the election. But also there needs to be greater focus with regards to GROW in terms of the security of our GROW buildings and the maintenance repair schedules that our buildings and our members are living within. But also we think there's a lot of work, and we will continue to talk to government about this, about how GROW across all of the public sector is better controlled. Maybe through an authority that everyone has equal access to, because certainly the lack of ownership for GROW has been one of the reasons why we've seen a demise in the standard and stock levels. So GROW is definitely one. Look, there are other announcements that have come out. It's hard to pick your way through exactly which is most important to members, but there will be many members who appreciate the Country Week announcement, because that will mean more kids are able to go to Country Week, which is actually a really significant achievement. We're looking for a few more, of course, from particularly the Cook government, which is highly likely to win government. But unfortunately, they haven't even delivered the writs on government yet, so we'll wait for the true election period to start.
And some infrastructure projects as well around the place, which will be of interest to a lot of members, Alkimos, East Perth, those sorts of things. Also announced recently. Matt, a couple of the things that will really matter to members in schools, the senior teacher win in the award negotiations in the new general agreement. There's been some info sent out about that, and there are resources available from the union to help people qualify and gain that extra credit for being a senior teacher.
There was a correspondence sent to school leaders at the very end of last term, but there will be more that goes to both school leaders and eligible senior teachers at the beginning of the school year from the department's workforce arm. And that will clarify exactly the process as well as the consultation that needs to take place. And then on top of that, of course, we've got our own messaging, which is available through union organisers, available through our socials as well. Actually, there's already been quite a bit of, I'm sure members have seen that in January, but also available through the website. So that's certainly a significant EBA win that's underway. I can also share for those members who are affected that district allowances will be processed during the course of this term, and people will start to see what that looks like for them in the February pay cycle. So I urge members who are going to receive that benefit. It is a massive change from the locality allowance to district allowance for many, many affected people. And I should also say that if there is any query around that, again, to get back to your union organiser, because it is entirely possible as we make these shifts and changes that the department, through no fault of their own, don't quite get the shift in what that allowance is. So we need to be on top of those things. And I think also from the beginning of the school year, the changes in documented plans to everybody, it's a really significant workload reduction win. There's still very much a lot of work to be done with the department around exactly what the expectations of documented planning from different business units within the department to schools is going to look like. But that work is underway. What people starting off at the school year really need to focus on is what is in the general agreement around documented plans. And there are 4 dot points which really very clearly and strongly, as you would expect, describe what you can expect and what you should not expect a documented plan for. And one of the most significant ones is going to be, one of the most significant ones that's going to have an immediate impact is that there is not a requirement for a student who is on a D or a E trajectory to automatically receive a documented plan, because we know that that's been happening. So there's a fair bit of change represented by last year's EBA that's going to come in and through schools. It is all very much focused upon workload, because that was effectively a theme that ran through the EBA that government was attracted to. And then, of course, the allowances, which we will always keep an eye on with our union reps that our members are truly receiving.
And they certainly should be. So do make sure these are conditions. They're not options. They're conditions in the new agreement. It can be difficult to sometimes end the status quo and get the new one in. But one way of doing that is to, of course, make sure you are represented in your workplace, maybe even by yourself. So we do, Matt, have an extensive publication getting organised, which we urge all members to take a look at and to make sure that we've got reps in as many schools as possible. We already have a large contingent, but it does make a massive difference to a workplace if you can get a rep and work through that, especially if the principal is also a member of the SSTUWA, because everybody's on the same page.
Makes life a lot easier when everybody is working, collaborating in a school. I think everybody fundamentally agrees and understands that. And really, hopefully, the conversations we're having in schools are all about making our school as efficient as possible and a lot more collaborative. Bob, I feel as if we're cheating members by not going into more of the EBA items, but there are so many more that have already been put into place, as members would expect, going back to registration in November. And if they've got any queries about any of them, if they're a school leader, the right of return, or district high school, there's quite a few in there, level 3 principals, as well as many, many others, then really they need to get in contact with us if they're unsure.
And you can, as soon as you log into the website, which any member can do, as soon as you log into the website, in the area that you arrive at your dedicated site, the very first item you'll be able to click on is a guide to how the general agreement is being implemented. It lists all of the wins. It gives you a tracked progress of which ones are already underway and which are still to come, and that can give you a very strong base to make sure that you are getting what you're entitled to, or to see the opportunities that may lie ahead of you. For example, the ability to go as a level 3 principal, I think it is, for a couple of years to the country and have your current spot retained for you. So there are many options like that in the agreement. It is difficult to keep on top of them all. And if you're not following us already on Facebook and or Instagram, it's well worth doing, because we do share an awful lot of information on there. It's at-a-glance stuff. You don't have to get into it in depth if it doesn't impact on you, but there's always a link to click on if it does. And, of course, the comprehensive Know Your Rights sheets, and eventually the full Red Book will also be available online. So www.sstuwa.org.au is a bit of a mantra on here, but for a good reason. And Matt, for the younger teachers, one of the worrying things in that system review was that of the 5,200 teachers who had gone over a 3-year period, over 60% of them were under 30. So please, I think the message is, isn't it, seek support. There is dedicated new educator support via the SSTUWA.
Yeah, the New Educator Network, I've always said, is one of the great assets of the SSTU. Grows and grows and grows. Of course, for our graduates, one of the significant wins from the EBA last year was increasing the graduate allowance from $1,600 per annum to $2,000. I've already had correspondence confirming from the department that not only is that $2,000 underway in terms of its HR processes, but it's also back paying many 2024 graduates the additional $400 simply because the EBA was started at the beginning of the year, and the moral approach is to make sure that they're recognised for 2024. So we've got graduates from 2024 who are now getting a bonus $400 before tax, obviously, that they weren't expecting, and of course the 2025 graduates onwards. There's also a lot more in the EBA for the graduates than just the allowance. The expectations and support, mentoring, professional learning is all very clear and tight now. So I would encourage any graduate who is out there in the field for the first time, who doesn't feel or is unsure about receiving the appropriate support time or professional learning time, to make sure that they contact Chloe or another member through our organiser network to make sure that they're getting the support that they need, and they'll get a pretty swift response from us.
And you can get a highlights package, if you like, on a previous podcast. So where you're listening to this podcast from, go back a week or so and you'll find one involving Chloe Hoskin, who leads our growth team, and you'll find a lot of handy tips there you can listen to as you're going to school. The other thing I would urge people to do is, if you know a younger teacher who might be struggling a little bit, then please point them in the direction of the new Educator Network. Obviously, we've got reasons to push union membership, but there's no doubt that having that support in your early years is absolutely vital.
And coming week one, term one, we've got a couple of graduates who are actually coming to work for us for the next 12 months. So these are people who have been teaching for a handful of years. They've become extremely positive and strong advocates of the SSTU. So they are really very well experienced in terms of what it is that our educator graduates are happening in their world. So they begin next week, and they'll be formally introduced to the membership through our social medias.
Matt, we've covered a lot of ground in a fairly short period of time. Given the funding announcements and everything else, and the need to get the system back on track, what's your parting message to our members out there, in addition to have a great year in your school?
Well, my first one would be, if you have a few moments, please read the agency capability review, particularly if you've been around the block a few times. It'll really resonate and you'll get it. But I think it's time to start the process of working together, school level, regional and system, and deliver the WA public education system that our people want and that our community expect. We do that by listening to the real experts, which is where Facing the Facts has really come from. And the real experts are those people who are our public school teachers and leaders.
Matt, thank you very much. This has been Western Teacher Live, the podcast of the State School Teachers Union of Western Australia. Thank you for listening.
Are you aware of your SSTUWA member benefits? We've got you covered on a range of member benefits, from entertainment to insurance and legal. Check out our benefits hub via sstuwa.org.au/benefits.